Bettina's been out doing interviews about her new book, #Men2, over the last few weeks, and we thought you might enjoy listening to a few of these, including some of the talkback radio which followed. The book's doing pretty well, and the first printing is sold out. We're sorry if you've been waiting for copies, but more are being printed now. The exciting news is that #Men2 is the #1 bestseller gender studies book on Amazon Australia. How the feminists must love that. Bettina's major motivation in putting together this collection of her writings about men's issues was to try to open up public discussion about what is happening to men. So, she approached stations run by the ABC, our public broadcaster, across the nation. These radio stations are almost all captured by the feminist narrative, so we weren't expecting much response. Funnily enough, the two ABC stations which did respond positively were situated in our far north, in northern Queensland, and deep south, in Tasmania. So first, here's a lively interview with Adam Stephen from ABC Far North in Cairns, Queensland.
Feminists see the Me Too movement as vital in balancing the social scales and reining in so-called toxic masculinity. But one Australian author believes the movement has morphed into something somewhat sinister. Bettina Arndt is a former clinical psychologist, sex therapist and former flag-flying feminist who is now passionately pro-man. Her new book, #Men2, is a collection of her writings about what she sees to be as an undervaluing of men in the modern world. I had a chat to Bettina Arndt about this book and some of the theories it raises, and I asked her whether she was running a dangerous line attacking a movement like Me Too.
I'm taking issue with what started off as a perfectly sensible idea. The Harvey Weinstein case was clearly an example of a man misusing his power to sexually exploit women, and I don't for one second support that. I think it's very important we call that out. But the #MeToo movement then totally derailed and became a really vicious movement where women feel entitled to derail men's careers on the basis of unproven accusations, sometimes over totally trivial issues that may have happened 30, 40 years ago. A man put his hand on my knee, or a man, made a sexual joke or said something that I found distasteful. I mean, what is this? That we can make those sort of accusations without any evidence, with the media conspiring to broadcast accusations without any proof. And I don't think most people agree with that. I think most discussions, public discussions I've been involved in, I get enormous support for discussing the fact that people have had enough of women misusing their power. This is about women's power in our society, and that power is being used to the detriment of men.
As a former clinical psychologist, Bettina Arndt, wouldn't you have probably told people in a position if they had a case of, say, historic, maybe someone had made a remark about them or touched them inappropriately historically, would you not have advocated for them to actually confront that person or to raise that issue, even if it was 20, 30, 40 years ago?
No, I think 40 years ago you just move on. It's too late. And particularly if we're talking about what I regard as trivial issues, someone making a sexual joke, someone making a sexual comment that made you uncomfortable. I strongly believe women should be empowered, should be supported to raise their concerns about that sexual issue in a proper place. I mean, we have procedures in all workplaces now encouraging women to seek help, to go to the correct, whatever it is, unit of the organisation, make a complaint about someone who has offended them in some way and discuss it. Sexual harassment was not supposed to be a hanging offence. It is about one person's discomfort over the way someone else behaves towards them sexually. It's not rape. It's not sexual violence. It's about perception of inappropriate behaviour. And when 30, 40 years ago, I got involved in some of the initial discussions around harassment, and the whole idea is this was supposed to be an educative process where we encourage women to speak out, we give them support to speak out, we educate the person who's behaving inappropriately as to what they're doing wrong. And it's morphed into this witch hunt where women who are angry with a man, a boss who in some way has offended them, a boss who may have complained about the way they behaved, whatever it is, women can now turn around and make a sexual allegation that will be extremely destructive to that man's career. And that's got nothing to do with the original approach that was proposed for dealing with the problem of harassment. And the other thing that really bothers me about all of this is in any workplace situation, one person may make a sexual joke or comment or make some sort of, banter around sex that other women find delightful, funny, enjoyable, and yet there may be one person in that workplace who finds that offensive. Why on earth should that one woman have the right to tell the rest of us how to behave?
We've been hearing today across regional Queensland from Bettina Arndt. She's a former clinical psychologist and one of Australia's first sex therapists with a new book out, #Men2, a collection of her writings about men. Well, you've recently taken umbrage at the pink cricket test, suggesting that breast cancer promotion has gazumped prostate cancer promotion. Not recently, but it's been something that's been happening over many years. But I'd imagine it's a pretty dangerous line to run, criticising, if you will, the fact that so many men were willing to wear pink to that cricket test in Sydney earlier this month. What would make you so passionately, could you say, against the pink test?
Oh, I'm totally against the pink test. I mean, I think it was a lovely idea. Well, obviously, it has a important, very personal, historical basis to it, with the loss of one of our major cricketers' wife to breast cancer, and the fact that they wanted to do something to acknowledge that is lovely, and it speaks to men's chivalry and kindness that they're willing to go out and dress in pink and pour money into providing more support for breast cancer nurses. But at what point, this is now a decade this has been going on, the pink test gets bigger and bigger, more and more money. I think the government gave, I can't even remember what it was, another 20,000, 30,000 to the pink test. I was there last year and I pulled out the statistics when I was there. And at that time, the day I was there were 28 prostate cancer nurses working around Australia, and already hundreds of breast cancer nurses. And yet men are more likely to die of cancer than women. Men are getting very little support for the really difficult process of dealing with the sexual consequences of prostate cancer treatments. And that's an area in dire need of more funding and more trained people to help men. Most men end up impotent as a result of the fact that we are not helping men through that process. And how do we justify this totally disproportionate funding for breast cancer compared to other cancers, even cancers like brain cancer, or there's a whole range of cancers that are being underfunded, and we pour more and more money into breast cancer. I had a letter from a woman yesterday who had breast cancer, and she said it was just ridiculous, the amount of support that poured in for her. And she said some of the breast cancer nurses were very unimpressive. As she mentioned, she's known men with prostate cancer who had no support whatsoever. Why do women's lives matter so much more than men's?
As someone who trained in the area of mental health and, the health of the brain and depression and all those kinds of things, as a clinical psychologist, what's your read on why we see such an imbalance when it comes to the suicide rate? So many more men taking their lives than women.
Yeah, that's a topic that I've written about and campaigned about for decades. We have 8 suicides approximately in Australia every day, and 6 of them are men. Our national suicide bodies have been incredibly resistant to addressing the fact that this is a predominantly male problem. They constantly turn around and say, just as many women attempt suicide as men. Well, I would have thought the outcome of that particular event is what's really important. The fact that we have dead men and we have grieving families having lost those men, and the fact that we are unwilling to do any research as to why men are killing themselves at such rates is just an indictment of mental health authorities.
Have you had arguments with various mental health authorities about this?
Absolutely. Because, for instance, there's some very good research, a little bit of good research that shows very clearly that men are at risk that one of the big trigger points for male suicide is relationship breakup, is men getting involved in the whole ghastly process of a marriage breaking up, a family breaking up, and particularly losing their children in that process, losing a proper parental role with their children. And we know that, as I said, there's some good research showing that relationship breakup is a key trigger point. When we have trigger points with women, like, a woman who's at risk for postpartum depression, she's had a baby, we've just absolutely shoved resources into researching that and finding ways of supporting women in that situation and trying to eliminate this particular risk. Why is it when we know men are at risk when their relationships break up, when their marriages break up, we are doing nothing? If anything, we're continuing to cut back on support. On organisations providing support for men in that situation, like Dads in Distress, which is an extremely good organisation supporting men in precisely those sorts of situations, has had an enormous struggle for funding. And, I don't know how we justify that. The only thing, there was a big program, I think it was called Man Up on ABC, to do with males and depression and suicide. And that whole program focused on the fact that men won't seek help. There was not one word in that program as to why men are killing themselves.
Bettina did an equally good interview with Pia Wersu from ABC Tasmania, which we won't play here because it covered much of the same ground as the Queensland interview. But what was really interesting was the reaction from listeners.
Had a text in from Carol. Carol says, I agree. I feel sorry for men these days. They've lost their identity. They don't know how to behave anymore. Women more than ever have men totally confused as to their role. Mutual respect is all we need to have. Carol, how many problems would be solved if we all just had a little bit more mutual respect? Thanks for your text. Ads has also sent a text in. The word misogyny is used frequently, but how many of us hear the word misandry, which of course is dislike, contempt, prejudice against men as opposed to against women? Amina Keegan from Burnie's called in. What's your take on this, Amina?
Oh, look, I'm only disappointed that I didn't get to hear all of Bettina's session. But had I been drinking a cup of tea, I think I probably would have, perhaps spat some of it out. I mean, just some of the claims around feminism going too far and feeling sorry for men and they've lost their identity and they don't know how to act anymore.
What is it particularly about all of that concerns you?
Well, I just think we've just got to, I think these movements like Me Too and all of that, I think have really started giving women a voice to things, to actions that have been happening that happen to so many women. I mean, just, a real, something that happened to me not too long ago. I was in a lift. I was on the phone, on a business call actually, and 5 men, it was just me, 5 men got into the lift. I was on the 6th floor and they said, going down. And I said, well, yeah, the lift is going down. And then one of the men responded, oh, I love a woman who goes down. And I was standing there in a lift and, that I called them out on that and it was kind of thrown back at me to just kind of take a joke and, can't say anything anymore and all of that. But I just think that kind of laddish behaviour really it's not been tolerated. It shouldn't be tolerated. And to say that men don't know how to act now because of feminism, I think is a real cop-out. Men and women can act respectfully to one another. And, all feminism is seeking equality between the genders, and
That's
we've
certainly
got such
something.
a long way to go.
That's certainly something one of our other texters mentioned as well, is that mutual respect goes a long way. Amina, thanks so much for calling in. And I should let our listeners know as well that Amina is a councillor with Burnie City Council. We got you there, Drew. What's your take on all of this?
Oh, hi, Pierre. Yes, thanks. I'm here. Look, my take is very much backing up your previous caller, not Ron, but the woman who's called just before. Amina, thank you. I didn't catch her name. But I suppose to answer your question at the beginning of your show prior to the interview, I mean, I personally think that the current gender equality discussion is and should be seen as a benefit for everybody, regardless of your gender. And, I mean, I certainly welcome the discussion. And I suppose if the Me Too campaign, in my mind, has done anything, has actually provided an opportunity for everybody to talk about these issues. And I guess my only thing is when you do hear somebody talking in a very emotional and spirited way, as Bettina did, I immediately question what is it that they're feeling threatened by.
Drew, thanks so much for your call. Good Lord, Pierre, you're doing well to remain composed. I couldn't disagree more with Bettina's views. My husband is more of a feminist than she claims to be. He sees that women have remained silent for too long about inequality and underlying power play of men over women for far too long. The pendulum needs to swing. Don't forget to pop your name on your text as well. Another one that's come in: men and women, viva la difference. Thanks for that one. Peter in Lonnie says, what I don't like about the Me Too allegations is that a man is automatically assumed guilty, loses his job and is victimised by the press on just allegations. Where is the innocent until proven guilty? I use Craig McLaughlin as an example of this. Alan has sent a text in. Hi, Pia. The ABC notoriously presents a sexist attitude favouring women over men, and it was obvious that you weren't comfortable with Bettina's comments. On the contrary, Alan, I think a conversation is a really important one to have, and if we can't at least converse about them, where are we heading? Goodness me. Also had a text in from Kim. What a joke. People outraged at women speaking out about harassment, which led to Me Too, is ridiculous. Every woman I know has a story of harassment, including myself. We need to keep speaking out to remove the stigma victims feel coming forward. Thanks for your text, Kim. Alida, disappointing. Bettina is just like the gathering getting my words all mixed up here. Gathering right-wing racist and it's okay to be white movement, appealing to the old status quo of the right of men to be the centre of attention. Conversations about women and the right of women to appeal against centuries of mistreatment is just readjusting the balance of life. It's interesting that you mentioned that, Alida, actually, because something Bettina explicitly said is that she thinks it's actually swung too far the other way. So much of the discussion is centred around women. It sounds as though you clearly disagree with that. Sally Ann's texted in. Hi, Pia. I thought you conducted the interview with Bettina Arndt really well. Women still have a lot of ground to catch up on when it comes to equality, but one thing we can all be sure about is that women calling out men on abuse issues from decades ago or now must be taken seriously. It takes courage to do this, particularly because there is still a significant degree of disbelief and public scrutiny is huge. Lisa's sent a text in. When men are being killed by their female partners or ex-partners at the rate of one a week like women are, then we can say that men are oppressed. Thanks for your text, Lisa. Steve from Launceston's called in. Steve, what's your take on it all?
I think the old opportunistic ambulance chasing lawyers, I think they've got a lot of a bit of a push behind the Me Too movement as well.
Oh, okay, so you think there's a little bit of commercial interest in there as well from lawyers and the like?
Good heavens, yes. I'm sure there's quite a few dollars to be made with some of these cases or allegations.
It's an interesting point you make, Steve. I wonder what sort of industry has sprung up from that. Steve from Launceston with his thoughts on it. Also, Jared sent a text in. Bettina was bang on with her opinion. I experienced a false allegation against me, was proven innocent by Tasmania Police, but was still treated as guilty, and I lost my reputation, my place of worship, my friends, and ended up moving away. The system is definitely biased towards women. Thanks for sharing your experience, Jared. And Stella from Launceston says, we should leave the past in the past and move forward. Start with a clean slate.
Well, that's it. For those of you in Australia, it'd be great if you could contact your local radio stations and ask them to interview Bettina about her new book. They can contact her through her website, which also contains details of how you can obtain copies of the book. Bettina's now planning her fake rape campus tour for this year, so if you know students anywhere in Australia, urge them to find a student group to host her talk. She has money for travel expenses from her crowdfunder. With more universities now getting involved in adjudicating rape cases, she is determined to promote more discussion about dangers ahead for young men if we don't stand up and fight this dangerous trend.